the audience who has cannabis clientele? Okay. Are we talking more cannabis businesses and not necessarily criminal defense? Overall? Yeah. Okay. So this will be good. I'm assuming that most of you have clients that are currently in the OMMP, Oregon Medical Marijuana Program, that are looking to transition into recreational cannabis under Measure 91, which, as we all know now, is going to undergo a little bit of a facelift because of HB 3400, while the OMMP is kind of hanging in the balance, right? With the Oregon Health Authority ready to rule make, we know the OLCC is going to rule make, and we're going to get something different than maybe what we voted for in the initiative when it comes to the details. And how do I know that? Because the same thing happened to us in Washington. And while Oregon is different, there are certainly nuances. It's a different subset of businesses. Some of these themes are going to run parallel when we talk about things like banking, federal taxation, the regulatory rules and the updates, the constant shifting and movement of the OLCC over time. We're also going to talk about products liability, which is one of my personal favorites. Do we have any do we have any personal injury attorneys in the audience? At least one. Okay, fantastic. And obviously, we're going to talk about real estate, the land use issues, how do we navigate a cannabis leasehold, what should be in those leaseholds versus what we see in the typical commercial brokers association lease. And of course, as always, we're going to update you on the federal versus state conflict, which continues to evolve as these various federal agencies come out with different policy opinions regarding enforcement and treatment of cannabis businesses. It goes well beyond the Department of Justice. And finally, at the conclusion of our programming, we will entertain you all with an ethics credit, so you have to stay until the end if you want that credit. You heard my introduction. I'm Hillary Bricken. I've been doing this for a while, at least 5 years, which in the cannabis industry kind of makes you ancient. I encourage you all throughout the day to ask questions as the speakers are at the podium, or wait until the end. It really is your preference. So let's move to our first panel, which by far to me is going to be one of the most interesting panels of this day. I say that because the Oregon legislature has been extremely active in its lawmaking. We don't know what the OLCC is going to do, although we could all speculate. And our two speakers for this particular panel are going to provide us with some invaluable insights into the future, I hope. Our two speakers today are going to be Russ Belville and Representative Ann Leininger. And I think, Representative, you're going to go first, right, because of timing? So, Representative Ann Leininger represents House District 38 in the Oregon State Legislature. She co-chairs the Oregon Legislature's Joint Committee to implement Measure 91, which obviously legalizes the adult use of marijuana and creates this licensing system for marijuana businesses. She also serves on the House Judiciary Committee, House Revenue Committee, and on the Joint Committee on Tax Expenditures. And if you want, Russ, I'll introduce you when you're ready to go. Is that okay? All right, Representative Leininger, thank you.
There's me from the Portland Mercury. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for letting me join you here today. I'm Ann Leininger, and I've had the pleasure and the really interesting experience in the last 6 months to be co-chairing the legislature's committee on implementing legal marijuana in Oregon. I think to help frame my remarks, I'd like to give you some background on me. I'm a transactional attorney by training. I worked as general counsel for Oregon Ironworks for a couple of years, worked representing developers of affordable housing, and worked for the Meyer Memorial Trust, which is a foundation that serves Oregon and Southwest Washington, making debt and equity investments and structuring and underwriting investments in real estate development projects largely that have a community benefit purpose. So I bring and I'm a former litigator with the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, so I bring some interesting environmental issues, project issues, and small business issues. I also am from Southern Oregon, which is affectionately known by many as the Emerald Triangle. I grew up in Ashland, and my family has lived in Southern Oregon for 6 generations. So we are long time, early in Road Valley people who unfortunately bought less land than we would ideally have had in retrospect. But my frame of reference is one of having grown up in like a West Berlin of progressivism within the Road Valley in Jackson County, Southern Oregon, which is not which is not as progressive, right? But my family had a rock crushing business, which is also not progressive, but important. It's a natural resource extraction economy there in Southern Oregon, right? And it has been gravely affected by the change in the timber economy, which has significantly winnowed down. As we understand, we have to have more environmental protection regulation, and a lot of people in that part of our state and around our state have been trying to figure out, what do we do next? What is the next step for people who are used to making a living from the land in a natural resource extraction way as we become more focused on environmental sustainability? There are ever-increasing environmental protection regulations that affect what we do on our land, and there are a lot of people who need to make a living. So that is the framework that I bring to this work, and I worked on the Measure 91 campaign. So I was an active and public supporter, both because I think we need to find good ways for people all around our state, and particularly in some of our natural resource dependent parts of the state, who are trying to figure out where economic opportunity lies next, to have good jobs. And also because I am moved profoundly by concerns about disparate impact of law enforcement particularly on people of color. A friend of mine wrote a book called The New Jim Crow, right? Some of you have read that, about how people of color have been so disproportionately incarcerated and affected by our war on drugs that has in fact not solved, but maybe even exacerbated the problem that we have with controlled substances in the country. So that's what I bring. And I also bring this PowerPoint, which I will now attempt to use. Hey, all right, I'm going to talk about the economic, cultural, legal context. This chart shows that that the timber industry, once a really major economic power in Oregon, now accounts for less than 2% of the GDP in Oregon. And an interesting contrast is, as we've received a lot of testimony in the Measure 91 committee, the relative economic power of these two sectors is something really to think about. I read recently a statistic that said the direct economic impact from timber at this point in our state is about $2 billion annually, direct economic impact. And I have heard testimony, you may have been there for this testimony, that the marijuana sector right now, and it's not even a traded sector, officially a traded sector market, and more people will perhaps get involved with it as it's legal, is already $1 billion a year sector. And fascinatingly, the part of the state that is most well suited for outdoor growing in any event is exactly the part of the state that has been most affected by the transition from the timber economy. So I find that to be a really interesting symmetry. So this is a picture of something from Ashland, just to note that we are not only in an economic transition, an economic pivot point, but if you look at the politics of rural Oregon, and as a legislator and someone from that part of the state originally, though I now live in Lake Oswego, I represent Lake Oswego, Southwest Portland. If you look at the politics of Oregon, that area has traditionally, or has since the 80s, been strongly represented by Republican legislators, which is fine, and there's room for a wide range of views in our state. I respect that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens as the economic power of Southern Oregon shifts somewhat from the old school timber economy to this as an important emerging source of economic and perhaps also political power. It's generally different people, right, who are in the one industry and in the other industry. And when I went to Williams, Oregon recently, has anyone here been to Williams? It's a real sort of prime spot for outdoor cultivation in Southern Oregon. There are a whole lot of people there who talk about how they get their food at the Ashland Food Co-op, and how they, I think it's just a different set of political affinities and interests, and it'll be very interesting as economic power diversifies in that region to see what's going to happen in a political context as well. I think that the Ashland way of being is going to some of the Ashland preferences are going to be more apparent in other parts of Southern Oregon too. So it's important to know that as we move toward legalization or move into legalization after this July 1st, one of the important frameworks that we have to conduct our conduct within is that of the Cole Memo. Who here knows the Cole Memo? All right, so that is a piece of guidance the Department of Justice, US DOJ, issued in 2013, essentially saying that if you adhere to these 8 or so strictures about how you run marijuana legalization in your state, we will not come in with the muscle of the DEA and shut you down or arrest people. And those parameters are things like, are you keeping marijuana out of the hands of children? Are you taking steps reasonably to eliminate gang activity and violence? Are you keeping marijuana off public lands? You know, in Southern Oregon, grows on public land have been a really big problem and created safety problems for people who want to use our public lands. Are you keeping it off of federal property? A variety of things. I think I included the Cole Memo in the meeting materials. But as we are working as a legislature to support an orderly rollout of Measure 91 and successful continuation of the medical marijuana program, one of the things that was really emphasized to us is the need to take reasonable steps to try to prevent diversion or leakage into the gray market of product that may be grown legally. But in the medical context, I think we all recognize that a lot of people have a lot more product than they give to patients, even if they're really altruistic, good-hearted people who are doing right by patients. And how do we help make sure that that doesn't get diverted into the gray market? So that's animated a fair amount of our work in terms of implementing legalization. You know that in 1998, Oregon voters decided to allow medical marijuana. And in allowing medical marijuana, Oregon has joined 23 other states that allow medical marijuana. And it's been a robust and very successful program that the legislature has, as far as I can tell, tweaked and evolved quite a bit over the last 10, 12 years. Of course, the Measure 91 campaign was successful, and even though it went in 2014, November 2014, and it won with 56% of the votes cast, a lot of people thought maybe that wasn't going to work, right? Because it was brought to the ballot not in the presidential year, but there was tremendous teamwork. Who here was involved with the Measure 91 campaign? All right, nice work. And it's an exciting transition for our state. So now we join 4 states and the District of Columbia as states that allow legal adult use marijuana. And in 2016, we expect at least 5 other states, including California, Massachusetts, California, Massachusetts, Nevada, possibly Maine, and one other, anyone, are going to have these measures on the ballot also. And so, you know, we are definitely heading into a time when legal, responsibly used adult use marijuana is going to be legal across the country. And when that happens, the state legislature wants to make sure that Oregon businesses have an opportunity to be at the forefront of the new traded sector opportunity. You know, it's already $1 billion annual business, and Oregon is perfectly situated to be a prime producer in this new market. And so we've been working to create a legal framework that will let legal cannabis businesses take a place alongside artisan food and wine and beer production businesses in a new wave of successful Oregon entrepreneurs that operate on sustainability, you know, with an eye towards sustainability and local production and often progressive values that I care about, like treating workers well. And you know, you'll be interested to know United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, played an active role in the campaign. This gentleman came on with that. They played an active role in the campaign because they care about workers having good jobs with health insurance and other benefits and being treated well and making a decent salary. And from what I understand, they've entered into one agreement already with an integrated cannabis business that has grow, distribution, and retail sites in the medical space that's going to really give voice to a lot of those values. So it's kind of an opportunity for us to create a really exciting new sector that operates with the values that a lot of us share, a lot of the cannabis entrepreneurs share, that I think align very much with the core values of Oregon. So it's really extremely exciting in that way. So our agenda through the session has been to take steps necessary as to the medical marijuana program to help it operate in a strong way, to continue operating, to keep patients access to medicine, and to try to deal with diversion issues. Because if we want the adult use retail market to succeed, we have to make sure that it's not being significantly undercut by a really flourishing gray market. And so within the medical space, we've taken a couple of steps. We've implemented a more robust tracking system. This is in House Bill 3400 that the legislation is in. And let me just tell you, we have 5 key pieces of legislation that have passed through both chambers, passed out of the Measure 91 committee unanimously. There's a very broad spectrum of bipartisan people in that committee, but we unanimously endorsed House Bill 3400, which is the medical adjustments and the implementation of Measure 91, some adjustments around Measure 91. House Bill 2041, which moves the point of taxation from point of harvest to point of sale and allows local governments that allow all legal kinds of marijuana in their jurisdiction to invite its community to vote on whether they also want to impose a 3% local option sales tax. And then we have Senate Bill 460, which enables legal cannabis to be sold, adult use cannabis to be sold from medical dispensaries starting October 1st, if the local jurisdiction does not prohibit it by ordinance, and if the dispensary wants to do it. And that would start being taxed as of January 1, because Department of Revenue fundamentally just can't get a whole taxation system up and running between now and October 1, but they could by January 1, so that would give people a few months of adult use tax-free purchasing. Senate Bill 844, which gives medical patients a few additional rights and opportunities. One, if you're in hospice, it expressly allows someone other than your caregiver to administer medical marijuana if you wish that to happen, and if the hospice provider is comfortable doing that. And if you are seeking an organ transplant, you can't per se be taken off the organ donor list because you use medical marijuana. That's part of this. Another piece of this is a task force on medical research and identifying how we can overcome some of the structural barriers, namely federal dollars can't be used to support cannabis research right now. So how do we overcome those structural barriers, and how do we help necessary and useful cannabis medical research move forward? I think a lot of us agree that we want to know more about what the helpful properties are. We want to know more about any harmful issues that we need to be aware of. There's a strong feeling within the public safety community that we want to understand a little bit more about how we can reasonably deal with driving while intoxicated issues. And that meets up against the strong desire by many of us to prevent unduly intrusive ways of detecting cannabis in the system. So, but my favorite part of Senate Bill 844, and this is a theme that I think my colleague on the panel will also be talking about, is expungement opportunities. So if we care about the fact that the people of color are roughly 2 times more likely to be in trouble with the law for marijuana offenses, even though people of all backgrounds use and break those rules at roughly the same rate, then you have to care about disparate impacts. And you have to care about the fact that a lot of people got in big trouble, and it's really stigmatizing to have criminal offenses on your record for conduct that's no longer illegal. So a key piece of the work that we've been doing is making sure that if you may have violated a law related to cannabis in the past, and it's no longer illegal, or we've come to understand that it shouldn't be illegal, you shouldn't wear a lead weight around your ankle for the whole rest of your life because you did that at an earlier time in our country's history. I mean, we are evolving as a country socially in a whole bunch of ways, right? The marriage equality transitions that we've all embraced show that. A number of other things too. And so Senate Bill 844 enables people who are under age 21, who've had a marijuana-related offense, to have that expunged within 1 year after completion of any penalty, as long as they don't have subsequent stuff that they're getting in trouble for. And so that creates a 1 year expungement waiting period instead of the 5 year that otherwise applied. In Senate Bill or House Bill 3400, you'll see that we reclassified a whole bunch of cannabis-related crimes down from Class A felonies, Class B felonies to misdemeanors, or in some instances, Class C felonies, which is the smallest kind of felony. And in many instances, we reduced the waiting period for expungement down to 3 years from 10 years. So I personally feel like that's a really important thing. And fundamentally, the fact that we were able to get this committee of legislators that includes, the Senate, the minority leader, who's fabulously smart and charismatic, but much further to the right than I am on environmental issues. Jeff Cruz from Roseburg, Peter Buckley, who's very progressive, Floyd Prozanski, who's very progressive, and everyone in between to unanimously support bills that simultaneously said things like sales tax, crime reduction, and marijuana. Who would have thought 3 years ago, who would have thought that we could get that chorus of people unanimously embracing this legislation? It shows the really significant cultural change that we're going through. So that's a bit of a snapshot on changes we've made in the medical marijuana framework. Enhanced tracking, efforts to protect existing dispensaries, some plant limits, but with grandfathering provisions in, so that if you've grown, most everyone that we identified grows under 100 plants right now, because I guess federal law kicks you into a more significant penalty category if you go above 100 plants. So 96 plants was the ceiling that we identified. We made some changes so you can lawfully possess what you've grown lawfully, which is really significant, because it used to be the case that you could get in big trouble the moment after you harvest, because suddenly you were in violation of law, even if you were lawfully growing with cards for a certain number of patients. And we've tried to make the tracking system not too onerous, because we want to make sure that the mom and pop growers, the small growers who may be doing this work right now, and there's an influx of much more sophisticated, well capitalized businesses coming in, and that's part of the business process. But we want to make sure that we don't make compliance with some more rigorous rules so onerous and so costly that businesses that want to come in to a regulated system just can't do it, because they don't have the money, and it's an extremely alienating level of regulation. Now, whether we hit it, the sweet spot on that is to be determined, but we made a conscious effort to make the medical program one that is prudently regulated but not excessively regulated, such that it pushes people away from wanting to comply. Anybody watch Schoolhouse Rock when you were little, or is that just me? Yeah, thank you. So implementing Measure 91, we again, we needed to define some things about the kind of tracking system that we would have. We needed to define the kinds of licenses and certifications. Like, have you heard of the Immaculate Conception Program? I mean, I guess everyone here has heard of Immaculate Conception. And it's a head scratcher, right? So in the legal cannabis sector, there's also an Immaculate Conception problem, because as of July 1, you can grow 4 plants, right, at your house, and you can receive gifts of marijuana, but you can't get the seeds and starts yourself legally in order to produce it at your house. And so we have some problems associated with where you get the stuff to lawfully exercise your rights under this new law. So we have certifications that allow businesses to sell seeds and starts, and kind of a range of things that you'd want to do. We of course moved tax from point of harvest to point of sale. which can also be said as sales tax, which is, you know, it's a big cultural shift. It's almost like we said, and you shall pump your own gas. We did not say that, because that would have been crazy, right? But we did implement, with the unanimous support of the sector, a sales tax for cannabis taxation, because people all of just said it will be way more efficient. You know, we're trying to run successful businesses here. It would be much more efficient to do it in this way, and also it would be much better for concentrate and edibles producers, because if you tax at point of harvest and people are making products that involve really intense concentrations of cannabis, then that would have rocketed the price of those products by incorporating in the taxation at the point of harvest to an unattainably high place. So we got input from people that it would be much better from the industry's perspective to do point of sale. The 3% local tax, that's a change from Measure 91. And as someone who worked on the campaign, I was pretty reluctant at the outset to support any change to Measure 91. But after a bunch of debates and negotiations, it seemed clear to me to do it. Thank you. Essentially, we have a cultural problem. We have a cultural issue, and that is not every part of Oregon is as comfortable with the idea of cannabis legalization as I am, or as the people I went to high school with in Ashland are. But we all now are under the same state law, and so after just about fracturing the committee over whether we would allow local opt-outs without a vote of the people, because Measure 91 allows local communities to opt out on the vote of residents, we came to a conclusion that communities that voted really significantly against Measure 91, where it's pretty much likely that the voters would choose to opt out, they may opt out through action of their local elected officials. If 55% or more of the community voted against Measure 91, then local officials may opt out on behalf of the community. Otherwise, you have to have a vote of the people. That captures a huge amount of the state, but not some of Eastern Oregon. So we decided to add a sweetener. And that is, if you allow every type of legal marijuana business, and don't prohibit any of the types of legal marijuana businesses, though you may have time, place, and manner regulation, which is fully appropriate in my opinion, then you may also invite your voters to weigh in on whether they'd like to have a local option, 3% sales tax. And I think that may help some communities that are a little bit on the fence decide that they will try this new thing, which for some communities is scary and alien, and we are moving into a new era, and it's not 100% pretty, but it's a compromise that enabled us to move forward and get unanimous support for a lot of other good things. So I think that it was a good idea in the end. Some of the universally relevant issues we've been working on are lab testing and product contamination testing, and those sort of potency testing, so that when consumers buy a product, they know exactly what's in it, and they know how strong the product is going to be. There are land use issues that I think you're going to talk about later on. You know that getting an accessory dwelling on EFU land is typically contingent on having $80,000 a year in farm revenues from that land. And now that we are introducing illegal cannabis at the crop, raises important issues that some of the pro-conservation, environmental protection, farm use conservation people really care about, in terms of, are we going to be opening up after Measure 49 and then Measure 37 and all that land use battle? Have we just created a new situation in which we're going to have tons of accessory dwellings on farmland, and then people are going to stop using it as farmland, and we're just going to have a whole bunch of little ranchettes? That's a big issue for us to be dealing with in the future. I'm going to give you 3 issues we're going to deal with in the future, and then I'm going to stop. Over the interim, we're going to have a work group on environmental impacts from this new sector, things like energy impacts, energy consumption, and how we can lawfully incentivize energy efficiency. Going indoor is a very energy intensive activity. Water use, and how this new sector is affecting water supply or water use in the agricultural sector, and pesticide use. I think you may have seen that